Story 1. When my dad was about 50 years old, he decided to get himself an African gray parrot. My dad had always loved parrots. His fascination with them went back as far as I could remember. So, when he finally got one after retiring, I was genuinely happy for him. He named the bird Kevin. Over time, my dad taught Kevin a whole arsenal of words and even managed to get him to understand what some of them meant. Kevin knew how to say things like, hello, what's up, food, thank you, good, and a few other phrases. My dad and Kevin became inseparable. You could tell they had a special bond. My dad passed away at the age of 70. When that happened, my siblings and I had to figure out what to do with Kevin. Neither my brother nor my sister wanted to take on the responsibility of keeping him, and their spouses were not on board with it either. I could not stand the idea of giving Kevin away. That bird was like a living piece of my dad, his little best friend. I knew there was no way I could let Kevin go, so I decided to bring him into my home. I set Kevin's cage up in the den, which is on the lower level of my house. I do not have a basement, so the den is as low as it gets. Kevin can be a noisy bird. He tends to chatter away for hours at a time, mostly in the mornings and afternoons. By evening, he usually settles down, and at night, he is quiet. If he gets too loud, I cover his cage with a blanket, which helps calm him down. I often watch television in the den to keep him company, but by about 10 p.m., I head to my bedroom so he can get some rest. That has been our routine for the past 2 years, and I know his behavior like the back of my hand. If Kevin is acting strange, I know something is up. One night in December, around 11 p.m., Kevin started making an unusual amount of noise. I was already in bed, trying to fall asleep. I keep my bedroom door open since I live alone and want to be able to hear if anything is going on in the house. Hearing Kevin squawking this late at night was not normal for him. Something had to be bothering him. I got up and went down to the den to check on him. Kevin was wide awake, perched on the lower rung of his cage. He looked right at me and started saying things like, hello, what's up, and even his own name. He was nodding his head up and down, moving his entire body in a kind of rhythmic motion, almost like he was dancing. I tried offering him some food, but he did not eat. I decided to cover his cage with the blanket, hoping that would help him settle down. But as I walked into the kitchen, I could still hear him making noises. I let out a frustrated sigh because I had work the next day and needed to get some sleep. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I am no bird expert, and I was stumped. I went back to the den and uncovered him. He was still doing his strange little dance, bobbing his head and making distressed sounds. That was when I heard something, a faint noise coming from the pantry closet near his cage. I froze for a second, then cautiously walked over to the pantry. My hand hovered over the light switch, which was outside the door. The pantry door has one of those glass panels, and when I flipped the light on, I saw the silhouette of a person inside. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I chose to fight. I threw the door open, screaming to pump myself up, and grabbed the man hiding inside. I yanked him out and threw him to the floor. He was a scrappy, older guy, probably in his 50s, who looked homeless and smelled like it too. As he tried to fight back, I managed to get him into a chokehold. He clawed at my face, probably aiming for my eyes, but I tightened my grip and kept hitting him. Meanwhile, Kevin was going absolutely wild in his cage, screeching louder than I had ever heard before. Once the man seemed too weak to fight back, I sprinted to grab my phone. I came right back, keeping him pinned to the floor as I called 911. The police arrived and took him into custody. He had no identification on him and nothing to his name. They said he was homeless, which meant there was no point in suing him since I would not get anything out of it. Later, I saw that he had ransacked my pantry. He had open jars of peanut butter, boxes of cookies and crackers, and other canned goods. If it were not for Kevin, who knows what that man might have done or taken from my house. To this day, I am grateful for that bird. In a way, I like to think my dad is still watching over me through Kevin. Story 2. This story takes place back when I was a junior in high school. To set the scene a bit, I was the kind of student who stayed busy. I took all the challenging classes and was involved in a couple of varsity sports. My packed schedule left me with little downtime, and honestly, I was grateful for the distraction. It gave me an escape from everything going on at home. My parents had recently divorced, and my older brother had just left for college. That left just me and my younger brother, Reese. He was a swimmer too, and just as sharp as they come. We had a lot in common, but back then, the stress of everything made it hard for us to get along. One of those cold, wet winter evenings in the Midwest, I had just finished up another long day. I went from school straight to swim practice, and when I finally got home, I still had hours of homework waiting for me. I had this essay to write for some advanced English class, one I did not care much about, but had to push through anyway. As soon as I walked in the door, I dropped my swim bag on the floor and looked around. The house was quiet, empty. My dad was probably out with Reese at his club swim practice. Their team had pool time right after my high school team wrapped up. I grabbed a handful of Cheez-Its from the kitchen and headed down to the basement, where I had a little setup I called my office. The house was a pretty standard middle-class two-story with an unfinished basement. The only exception down there was this one small room that had been finished out when my dad used to work from home. He did not use it anymore, so the space became mine. Everyone in the family just started calling it Quinn's office. The basement was dimly lit and had concrete floors with a few random carpet samples laid out here and there. I made my way to the office, flicked on the overhead light, and sat down at the desk. It was just another night. Same routine, different day. I turned on the computer and got to work. I spent what felt like an hour typing away, trying to string together something halfway decent about hedonism and the picture of Dorian Gray. I was not exactly passionate about it, but I had to get it done. Out of nowhere, I heard my little brother's voice. "Quinny, Quinny, come up," he called, his voice echoing faintly across the basement. Without thinking, I yelled back, "Reese, I'm working. What do you need?" That was how we usually communicated, shouting through the house like typical siblings. But then it hit me. I had not heard him come home. I stopped typing, and for a moment, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Then, his voice came again. "Quinny, Quinny, come up." Something about it sent a chill down my spine. Reese was supposed to be at swim practice. I called out again, asking if he needed anything, but there was no answer. Part of me wanted to just shrug it off and get back to my essay, but things were tense enough in our family as it was. If Reese actually needed something, ignoring him would not help. Reluctantly, I got up to check. I jogged up the basement stairs, calling out, "Reese, what's up? I'm busy." I checked the main floor. No shoes by the door, no backpack, no sign that he had come home. The driveway was empty, too. It all made sense. My dad was still out with him. Satisfied, I turned to head back to the basement. That was when I heard it again. "Quinny, Quinny, come up." This time, every hair on my body stood on end. It was his voice, but it made no sense. If Reese really needed me, why was he not coming to me? I hesitated for a second, then walked to the base of the staircase leading to the second floor. The top of the stairs was shrouded in darkness. "Reese, what is going on? Are you okay?" I called. No answer. I stood there, staring into the dark. Logic told me no one was up there. But then, in a calm, almost unsettling tone, I heard his voice again. "Quinny, Quinny, come up." It was not sing-songy this time. It was eerily flat. My heart was racing. I tried to make sense of it. Was it a prank? A break-in? Was I imagining things? None of it added up. I decided to go upstairs, thinking maybe Reese really did need me. Step by step, I climbed, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I was about to reach the landing, I heard the familiar buzz of the garage door motor. I froze, then turned and bolted back downstairs. Peering out the window, I saw my dad's car pulling into the driveway. I watched as he and Reese got out, laughing about something. They were just getting home. I stumbled away from the window, overwhelmed by a mix of fear and relief. When they came inside, I was sitting on the floor in the hallway, shaking and crying. To this day, I have no explanation for what I heard that night, but I know one thing for sure. It was not Reese. Story 3. This happened about 15 years ago when I was a kid. My best friend, Jackson, and I decided to explore an abandoned family resort in upstate New York. It was one of those old bungalow colony places, tucked away off a main road and down a secluded dirt driveway. The property was massive, with a cluster of abandoned buildings. There were at least 10 small bungalows, a big main hall, a couple of bathroom stations, and even a pool house with an indoor pool. Outside, there was a playground, an outdoor pool, and a shuffleboard area. Everything was falling apart, with weeds and tall grass taking over. The first time we stumbled upon this place, it was by accident while walking along Route 209. We did not check it out right then, but we promised ourselves we would come back. A few days later, just after sunset, we returned. The sky was fading to darkness, and the shadows stretched long. We figured sneaking in at night was smarter, less chance of getting caught and charged with trespassing. We brought along a couple of walkie-talkies and flashlights to stay in touch if we split up. At first, we stuck together, poking around the bungalows. Most of them were small and similar, just a room or two, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. Some had a tiny living room. Jackson moved a bit slower than me, so eventually, I decided to check out the main hall by myself. It was the largest building on the property, probably an office or meeting space back in the day. I tried every door, but they were all locked. I grabbed my walkie and radioed Jackson. "The big building's locked up," I said, but there was no reply. Maybe I was out of range? I kept exploring and soon found myself in front of one of the two bathroom buildings. It was a small, rectangular structure, maybe 400 square feet. There were no doors, just two wide, open entrances, one for the men's side, one for the women's. The old, faded signs were barely readable. As I stood there, my flashlight caught something strange on the floor of the bathroom, a trail of red marks. I will not say they looked exactly like bloody footprints, but I could not figure out what else they could be. Even now, I have no idea. The inside of the bathroom was pitch black, and something about it felt off. For the first time that night, I felt genuinely creeped out. I pressed the button on my walkie and called out, "Yo, where are you?" As soon as I released the button, I heard the unmistakable beep of the receiving walkie, but it came from inside the bathroom. My heart skipped a beat. Was Jackson in there? Maybe those red marks were his footprints. I called out his name, my voice echoing off the cold concrete walls. There was no answer. I stepped closer to the entrance, hesitating, when suddenly I heard Jackson's voice behind me. "Hey, I'm over here," he shouted from somewhere in the darkness outside. His voice was getting closer, but I could not see him yet. Relieved and confused, I yelled back, "I found your walkie-talkie." Then I stepped toward the bathroom again, figuring he might have dropped it in there earlier. That was when he shouted, "Do not go in there." I was never in there. I froze. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the small hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Slowly, I backed away from the bathroom. Just to be sure, I pressed the talk button on my walkie and let go, triggering the beep again. This time, the sound came from deep inside the pitch-black women's side of the bathroom. Jackson finally reached me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, without saying a word, we turned and bolted. We sprinted back toward Route 209 as fast as we could, not stopping until we were out of breath and standing under the faint glow of a streetlight. Once we caught our breath, Jackson told me what had happened to him. He had gone into one of the bungalows and tried to radio me, but I did not respond. He figured we were too far apart. Then, while he was poking around, he heard a noise coming from the small living room area. When he turned his flashlight, it landed on an older woman charging straight at him. She looked disheveled and terrifying. Panicking, he dropped both his flashlight and walkie-talkie and ran. He kept running in the dark, eventually hiding behind some bushes. When he finally felt safe, he spotted my flashlight over by the bathrooms and came to find me. The only explanation we could come up with was that some drug-addicted squatter had been living in one of the bungalows and somehow ended up with Jackson's walkie-talkie. But that did not explain the red marks in the bathroom, or why the walkie kept beeping from inside that pitch-black room. Even now, thinking about it sends chills down my spine. Some parts of that night just cannot be explained, and that is what makes it so terrifying.